Okay, I want to go through multiplying and dividing integers. So everything we've done so far with integers with positive and negative numbers has been adding and subtracting them. And the rules to those are more challenging, meaning, you have to decide there's double signs, and then you go through and you have to decide do they fall into step 2A or step 2B. And so, it kind of takes practice, as you saw, and you got to keep going. And it's something you're going to keep seeing now in math. You're going to always have negative numbers. But the rules to multiplying and dividing integers is actually easier. They're very set. And the reason why I put them together is because they're the same, whether you're multiplying or dividing. So it's not, one or the other on each one. They're all the same, whether you're multiplying or dividing, the negative rules. And like I said, they're much more just simple. The only thing that makes these challenging is what they look like when you see them, to identify that they're multiplying, okay? Mainly multiplying, not so much dividing. So it's not so much the rules that are hard to follow, it's seeing them and trying to decipher why it's not a plus or minus, why it is a multiply. And I'm going to try to really explain that. But first off, if you have one positive and one negative, okay, when you're multiplying or dividing, okay, and that's in any order, whether, the negative number comes first and then the positive number, or vice versa. If you have one of each, the whole thing is going to be negative. Like I said, that's why these are easier. It's like as soon as you identify one's positive, one's negative, then the whole answer is going to be negative. If they're the same, meaning they're both, we know if they're both positive, if you've got like 3 times 2 and they're both positive, that's going to be a positive 6. But this one we've probably never seen before, negative times a negative. And if you've got a negative times a negative, then the whole thing becomes positive, okay? And that's it goes back to the saying, that one's a common saying, a negative times a negative is positive. Now, that's true, and it's same with dividing. A negative divided by a negative is positive, but it's just identifying that it's a multiplication problem. That's where it becomes the issue. Okay, so let's take a look at a few of these. Now, if I was to write out something like 5 times negative 2, we would know that's multiplication. We would know then, okay, one's positive, one's negative, so we get a negative 10. You still have to multiply. You still have to do 5 times 2, 10, but because one's positive and one's negative, it's negative 10. Even if we wrote that as 5 with the dot, since we got away from the x in MATLAB, because now when we get here in a few units, we're going to be working with letters, and we don't want to use x anymore. Even if we saw this as 5 times negative 2 that way, we would know, oh, hey, this is a multiplication problem. We're going to get negative 10. Okay? And that's true if they were both would have been negative, like negative 3 times negative 2. Okay? Now that's a negative times a negative, so the whole thing is positive, and it's 6. You still got to do 3 times 2 and get 6. But see, what makes that easy is if we're looking through, we know this means to multiply, okay? And so right away we can identify that it's a multiplication problem. The problem with that is you're not gonna have these symbols. Like I said, in math, they're always trying to make it as little symbols as possible. They're always trying to condense space, always trying to make it the smallest as possible. And you'll see that these, especially when you get into distribution later, and we're going to get into that later, these are not needed. They're not used in math. Now, I put one on your homework just to remind you that these are multiplication problems, but these will not be there, these dots and x's. So let me rewrite these, what they're going to look like. Okay, you're going to see them like this. Okay, and I'm going to rewrite this one the same way. Okay, and then I'll rewrite this one, which you're going to see. And we're going to talk about why this is not adding or subtracting, this is multiplying. Now, if you remember, we did some problems. Let's use this one as an example. We maybe did a problem, let me work these first so that you don't think I'm working part of this. So this one here, it is still 5 times negative 2. You say, well, why isn't it 5 minus 2? Well, that would look like this. Okay, 5 minus 2 would look like that. Okay, they wouldn't need the parentheses, so they wouldn't use it. And so when you have this parentheses here, and remember we talked about too, signs in between. So on some of our earlier problems, like last week or the beginning of this week, we had 5 minus negative 2. Okay, and I told you, hey, that's a double sign, negative, negative, and we changed it to 5 plus 2. Well, if you look, there's a sign in between the number and this number. Okay, well, here, there is no sign here. Okay, and when there's no sign between a number and a parentheses, or even a parentheses in parentheses, when there's no sign there, like a plus or a minus, then it is always going to be multiplication. So in this case, that's why I wrote this like this. It is 5 times negative 2. If there's no sign there, then the default operation is multiplication. So it's 5 times negative 2. Okay, which is negative 10. Same thing here, 5 times negative 2, which is negative 10. Now this one, even though they're both in parentheses, there's no sign in between. I know you say, well, there's a sign here. No, that's not an operation sign. That's telling you it's a negative 3 and a negative 2. Now, if there had been a sign, so this is what I was talking about earlier, if there had been a negative 3 minus a negative 2, or even plus a negative 2, then you would have had a sign in between there. And so in this case, we learned last week that this is negative 3 double sign plus 2. And then we would have done negative 3 plus 2. But that's not what this is. There's no sign. Excuse me. There's no sign in between the parentheses. So the default operation is to multiply. So this is going to be negative 3 times negative 2, which is 6. Okay? So anytime you see parentheses and numbers outside and there's no sign in between, meaning between the number and the parentheses, then it's a multiplication. So here's a couple other ways that could look. So we may have like 4 times negative 3. Let's do one that looks like this. Negative 2 times 6. It could be on this side of it. Okay. Now, see, this one actually, you can identify it as multiplication a lot quicker because this almost I know it almost starts to look like 4 minus 3, but if it was 4 minus 3, it would not need the parentheses. But this one, there's no way to think of anything but negative 2 times 6. This is not just another thing to make sure you learn at this point. This is not negative 26. Okay. If it was negative 26, they would not use these parentheses. They would just write negative 26. Okay, so when you see this, it's actually almost a little bit quicker to identify than this, that this is multiplication. Okay, so it doesn't matter what side the number is on, you're multiplying. Let's see, let's put, like I said, you could have a negative 2 times a 4. You could have let's do a negative 5 times a negative 4. Okay, so these are different ways that you could see multiplication problems. And so you're looking through and you're saying, okay, you got a number, you got a parentheses, there's nothing in between, nothing in between, nothing in between the two parentheses. So these are all multiplication problems. Then you just multiply 4 times 3, and because one's positive, one's negative, it's a negative 12. Same thing here, negative 12. Here's a negative 8. And this is a positive 20. Because you got a negative times a negative. So like the rules, like I said, are easy. Negative times a negative, positive. One of each, negative. And so that it follows that the whole time. But the key is just kind of identifying them. And what's nice is this first one I'm going to have you do, they're all going to be either multiplication or division. Now in division, just real quickly, and because it's division are easy to spot. In our case, either they're going to have a dividing sign like 8 divided by so you're going to have 8 divided by negative 4 or something like that, okay, to where you're going to have the division sign, or what you will mainly see, and on your assignment what you're going to see is a fraction. Now don't panic, we're not doing really fraction rules, but we do have to remember that a fraction is the top divided by the bottom. So like here's what that'll look like: 10 divided by negative 2, okay? Now I'm going to give you ones that will come out even, meaning they're not going to stay a fraction, they'll come out as a whole number. And so, you know, just keep that in mind for these ones that we're doing. I'm just getting you used to the negative rules. Now, here's one. Let me do another one and put another one up there. Negative 20 divided by negative 10 or something, okay? So here's what they're going to look like: top divided by bottom. And then with that, you're just following your negative rules. If one's positive, one's negative, then the whole thing is negative. And this is 10 divided by 2, which is 5. Okay? If they're both negative, okay, they're going to come out positive, and 20 divided by 10 is 2. So that's with division. It's easy to spot. The rules are easy, meaning just one of each, it's negative. If they're both negative, it's positive. And so those, you know, those follow the same rules, and they're easier to spot. Okay, just remember it's always the top divided by the bottom. Okay, so let me put your practice ones here, and I've got them written out here. So I'll give you a moment to kind of write those down. Okay, so these are either going to be multiplication or division, so you don't have to worry. And see, I put one on there with the dot in between just to remind you, but this is what you're going to see. Okay, now this one here, I'm sorry, I'll do a couple here and show you this one. So I'll do one here back on the practice page. Go ahead and write them down. If you need to pause it, you can. And let me do what I was talking about with the 3-digit. Okay, so let's do 2, negative 4, and then put 3. Okay, now we're going to learn later order of operations, meaning we're going to learn if we go left or right or what. If they're all multiplication, meaning, you know, we're multiplying this and no sign in between, we're going to go left to right, and we're going to go one at a time. So what you have to do with these is kind of do one at a time. So what's 2 times negative 4? Okay, 2 times negative 4 is negative 8. And then we still have to multiply that times 3. Okay, so we did 2 times negative 4, got negative 8, and now we still have to multiply negative 8 times 3. Negative 8 times 3 is negative 24. Okay, so it's going one at a time, but it's still following the negative rules. Let's do one like this. Okay, negative times a negative times a negative. Okay, so negative 2 times negative 3 first is positive 6. Okay, negative 2 times negative 3, negative times a negative is positive. And then a positive times a negative 4 is negative 24. Okay, so it went positive and then it went back to negative because you're going one at a time. And, you know, that like I said, that can always be that way. You could have, let's do one more, let's do negative 2 times negative 6 times 4. And I'm not even going to put that in parentheses. Okay, it doesn't have to be. It can be, but it doesn't have to be because there's no sign in between here, it means to multiply. So negative 2 times negative 6 first is 12. Okay, negative times negative is positive. And then now I'm going to put it in parentheses, and you can do that. The reason why is I don't want this to look like 124. Okay, now I know to do 12 times 4, which is 48. Okay. And you can use your calculator to do the, you know, if the multiplications give you a little trouble and you want to put those, that's fine. You can use your multiplication charts. I'm not really focusing, I mean, you do want to get them right. I do want to make sure you multiply right, but I'm not really focusing on the multiplication part of it. I'm focusing on the negative or positive, okay? So those are those problems again, and you'll turn those in for your assignment today, okay? Have a good weekend, guys.